Welcome to an overview of my project to create a mobile bench for my mitre saw. Currently it is just screwed to a piece of plywood and I move it around where I want to use it. While it's not very heavy, it's quite awkward, and normally I just use it on the ground or sometimes on my Black & Decker workmate shown here. Neither of these are ideal and it's not very ergonomic, and I'm also lifting and carrying it using parts of it that are not really meant for carrying. As well as moving it when not in use, it takes up a lot of shelf space in my garage. The aim was to put it on a bench of its own that was easily movable and release some of the shelf space where the saw currently sits. I'd make the bench capable of storing some of my other tools as well. While I'm more than capable of designing something from scratch, I thought I'd look online and get some ideas of some things that I could adapt, and I found this site here which had a bench remarkably similar to what I was hoping to make, and it was also a very simple design. I had all of the wood needed except for the board material, which I would need to buy. While there were dimensions provided, I saw that it was very easy to adapt the design, as these were not critical to its success. It was also a design that used a minimum of specialist carpentry joints and was very easy to assemble. I already had plenty of material for the legs and shelf supports from previous projects, and the only thing I needed to buy was some casters and the board material. I got the board material from Wickes, a large building supply store in the UK. One of the factors on the size of the bench was how big a board I could get in my car. After some careful measuring, I reckon I could get a 1.8 metre length in the car, and therefore the size I bought was the 600 by 1800mm board, 3 foot by 6 foot in old money. And so cutting that board in half lengthways would give me a working area of 600mm by 900mm, or about 2 foot by 3 foot, that was also the size I felt happy with and would suit the design I was working towards. So I'm making the bottom shelf here. I've already made the top earlier. I'm just marking out the position for all the screw holes to screw the board onto the shelf supports. Having got that, I'm then laying the shelf supports underneath the board, clamping it in place using my T-square just to make sure that everything is aligned. I don't need to be much better than a millimetre or two here, and there I am drilling the holes. Now I'm going to fit the supports for the end pieces, so these fit in between. Again, I've already marked out where the holes are going to go, so once the piece of wood is clamped in place, I can drill the holes and put all the screws in. Because it needs to be flush, I've countersunk all the screws. In the original design it said we needed to use pocket screws. All I've got here is some 90-degree mild steel galvanised corner support strengthening pieces, and I've just putting this in to give it some additional support. I don't think it's needed given the thickness of the wood that I've got, but it is going to take a bit of a hammering. So I'm now cutting the legs. I've used the height of my workmate as a nominal height, including the height of the casters that I'm going to fit. I've cut one leg to size, and then I know it's very bad practice, but I'm using that leg as a template for the other 4 legs. What I want to do is make sure that they're as close as possible in height, otherwise the bench will rock and wobble around. So I need 4 of these legs. So I'm now going to fix the legs to the top and bottom shelf. I've laid out the top and bottom shelf on the floor. They're actually sitting on the back legs as you're looking at here. I'm just trying to get it as reasonably close as possible because I do need to make a good job of getting the legs at 90 degrees to the top. So I'm sorting the first one out. Again, I'm using my square and I'm just clamping it nominally in place to hold it while I try and get the other leg, the left-hand leg as we're looking at it here, in position. Just a little bit of tapping to get the leg close to the bottom of the top, if that makes sense. And now I'm going to fit the second leg as well. Again, nominally clamp it in place, get my square out to make sure that it is square, and then we're good to go here. The last bit, a little adjustment just to try and make sure it's as good as it can be. The bottom of the bottom shelf support is actually aligned with the bottom of the leg. I'm now screwing those 2 legs into position, both at the top and the bottom, with just a couple of screws initially so that I can get the clamp off in order to hold it in place. Again, just checking that the legs are at 90 degrees, a couple of screws. I'm using 80mm screws here to really get into the wood to provide as much strength as possible. And now I'm just drilling all the other holes while I've got both the clamps off and doing the countersinking. I've now turned the unit over and I'm doing the same with the legs on the other side, just repeating the operation, clamping them in place, using the plastic mallet just to get them in position, and drilling all of the holes and marking out. Once I've removed the clamp, I'll put all of the screws in. I've put 5 screws in per leg, top and bottom, at the top and the bottom, just to give as much strength as possible. So before I put the casters on, I'm just marking out on the top where the saw is going to go. I'm just going to position the centre of the saw in the centre of the top. I'm now fitting the 4 casters. These are just cheap 75mm industrial casters from Amazon. The mistake I made was that the spacing of the screws I put in to hold the legs onto the side unit is almost identical to the spacing of the holes to mount the casters to the bottom unit. So I've had to screw in the screws at a slight angle, which is a little bit of a bodge. So I'm now finally fitting the saw to the worktop. I've used wing nuts and washers at the bottom so that it is relatively easy to remove the saw if I want to use the workbench for something else. So here's the finished product. I'm pretty happy with it overall. About £30 worth of materials and 4 hours worth of work probably. Thanks for watching.